I shouldn't have worn red tonight. That was the only thought running through 29-year-old Lucille Meiners' head as she stood at a dimly lit street vendor's stall in Busan's Jigalchi night market, her hand trembling around a paper cup of green tea. The same red dress that had once made judges lean forward in their seats now made her a beacon in the shadows. The same elegance that had earned her a crown 6 months ago now painted a target on her back. Because somewhere between the scandal that stripped her title and the debts that followed, Lucille had learned a brutal truth. When you fall from grace in public, predators can smell it a mile away. "Well, well, look what we have here." The voice came from behind her, sharp with mockery. Lucille's shoulders tensed. Jax. She'd seen him before, circling this market like a shark in denim and backwards caps, a street boss who controlled 3 blocks and thought that made him a king. "Didn't expect to see Miss Universe walking through my neighborhood," he continued, moving closer. His breath reeked of cheap soju and cheaper cigarettes. "Heard you lost more than that crown. Heard you lost everything." Lucille kept her eyes forward, willing herself invisible, the same survival instinct that had helped her smile through scandal, through bankruptcy, through her father's death. Just keep walking, just disappear. But Jax's hand clamped down on her arm, fingers digging into the soft flesh above her elbow. "I'm talking to you, Queenie." That's when she saw him. 3 feet away, at a weathered wooden table, sat a man in a black suit so perfectly tailored it looked like armor. His hair was slicked back with precision that suggested military discipline. He was drinking tea from a porcelain cup, the steam rising in delicate spirals against the harsh neon signs of the market. And he hadn't looked up once. Not when Jax's crew of 4 had surrounded her vendor stall, not when Jax grabbed her, not even when the muscular enforcer in the sleeveless shirt positioned himself to block her escape route. The man simply took another sip of tea, his expression one of complete and utter boredom. "You listening to me?" Jax spun Lucille around to face him, and that's when she saw it in his eyes. Not just cruelty, desperation, the kind of hunger that came from men who needed to prove they were more than they were. "I know you've got money stashed somewhere. Beauty queens don't just disappear without a safety net, so here's how this works." But Lucille wasn't listening anymore. She was staring at the man with the tea, because for the first time since Jax grabbed her, he'd moved. Just slightly. His hand had drifted to his collar, adjusting it with the casual gesture of someone bothered by an itch. And in that movement, she saw it, the edge of an intricate tattoo crawling up from beneath his shirt, disappearing into his jawline like smoke. Not a tattoo someone got for fashion, a tattoo that meant something in the shadows of this city. To understand how a disgraced beauty queen ended up caught between street thugs and a man whose silence felt more dangerous than any threat, you need to know what happened 6 months ago. 6 months ago, Lucille Meiners stood on a stage in Seoul, wearing a different dress, a crystal crown, and a smile that had been practiced for 18 years. She'd won. Against 73 other women, she'd won. Miss International Korea. The photographer's flashes had been blinding. Her father, dying of cancer in a hospital bed 300 miles away, had watched on a live stream, tears running down his hollow cheeks. "You did it, sweetheart," he'd whispered through the phone she'd snuck backstage. "You made it mean something." But here's the thing about beauty queens. Everyone watches them. Every second, every breath, every mistake. And when the photos surfaced 2 weeks later, Lucille leaving a hotel with Park Haeun, the alleged Korean Mafia boss who'd sponsored her pageant training, the story wrote itself. Never mind that he was her father's friend. Never mind that the meeting was Park settling her father's medical debts out of loyalty. Never mind the truth. The headlines screamed, "Beauty and the Beast, Pageant Queen's Dark Connection to Organized Crime." Her crown was revoked within 72 hours. Her endorsement deals evaporated within a week. Her father died 3 days after that. The stress of the scandal accelerated what the cancer had started. And Lucille disappeared. No social media, no interviews, no defense. She'd taken the money her father left her, not much after the hospital bills, and tried to vanish into the only place she knew nobody would look for a former beauty queen, the roughest night market in Busan. She'd been hiding here for 3 months, working at a small accounting office by day, eating cheap street food by night, wearing that red dress because it was the only nice thing she had left, and somewhere deep down she couldn't quite let go of who she used to be. Until tonight, when her past and her present collided in the worst way possible. Back at the night market, Jax's grip on Lucille's arm tightened. $5,000 by Friday, or we start taking payments another way. You understand me, Queenie? One of his crew laughed, a sound that made Lucille's stomach turn. She tried to pull away. Jax yanked her back hard enough that she stumbled into him. I said, do you understand me? Her voice came out small, broken. I don't have. Then you better find it. That's when the man at the table put down his teacup. The sound of porcelain meeting wood was soft, almost delicate, but somehow, in the chaos of the night market, the vendors shouting, the sizzle of street food, the distant traffic, that sound cut through everything. Jax's enforcer was the first to notice. His sneer faltered as he glanced at the man in black. What are you looking at? The enforcer barked. The man didn't answer. He simply stood up, brushing invisible dust from his suit jacket with movements so slow, so deliberate, they felt like a countdown. Jax finally turned, irritation flashing across his face. This doesn't concern you, friend. Keep walking. The man's eyes, dark, cold, and utterly empty of mercy, settled on Jax for the first time. And he spoke. One word, in Korean, low enough that Lucille almost didn't hear it. Go-e. Move. But it wasn't a suggestion, it was a command delivered with the weight of absolute authority, the kind of voice that expected obedience not through volume but through the certainty of consequence. Jax's face twisted with anger and something else, something that looked like recognition. His eyes dropped to the man's neck, to the tattoo that was now fully visible as he adjusted his collar. Oh shit, one of Jax's crew whispered, and Lucille watched as Jax's confident smirk crumbled into something primal. Fear. What happened next would force Lucille to choose between the streets that wanted to devour her and the shadows that had been protecting her all along. But before we get to the blood, before we get to the revelation that would change everything Lucille thought she knew about her father's death and her own survival, there's something you need to understand. Park Haeun, the Ghost of Busan, the man who controlled half the city's underground from a penthouse most people didn't even know existed, hadn't been at that night market by accident. He'd been watching Lucille for 3 months, ever since the day her father called him from his deathbed with one final request. Keep her safe, no matter what it costs you. She's all I have left. And Park Haeun never broke a promise. Welcome to a world where queens don't need crowns, and protection comes with a price written in violence. This is the story of how Lucille Meiners lost everything and gained a throne far darker than any pageant stage. Welcome to Afro Soul Storybook. Subscribe to watch more of our daily stories and comment where you're watching.
The red dress had been a mistake. Lucille knew it the moment she stepped into the Jigalchi night market, but by then it was too late to turn back. The fabric clung to her body like a second skin, the deep crimson catching every flicker of neon light, every suspicious glance from the vendors who'd grown used to her wearing faded jeans and oversized hoodies. Tonight, she'd wanted to feel human again, to remember what it was like to be beautiful instead of invisible. Instead, she'd made herself prey. She clutched her paper cup of green tea tighter, the heat seeping through the thin material and scalding her palm. The pain kept her grounded, kept her moving forward through the maze of food stalls and cheap electronics vendors, past the ajumas selling counterfeit designer bags and the men smoking in doorways who tracked her movement with eyes that calculated her worth. Just get home. Just make it to the bus stop. But the market seemed longer tonight, the shadows deeper. The fairy lights strung between stalls cast everything in alternating pools of brightness and dark, and Lucille felt exposed in every illuminated space, vulnerable in every shadow. She was passing a grilled fish stall when she heard a whistle. Low, deliberate, the kind of sound meant to reduce a woman to nothing more than an object to be appraised. Lucille's shoulders tensed, but she kept walking. She'd learned this lesson the hard way during her 3 months in hiding. Acknowledgement was invitation. Silence was survival. "Damn, baby, where you headed in that dress?" The voice came from her left. Lucille's peripheral vision caught the outline of 3 men lounging against a closed storefront, their postures radiating the kind of casual menace that came from owning territory. She walked faster. "Hey, I'm talking to you." Footsteps behind her now. Multiple sets. The casual swagger of men who knew nobody would stop them. Lucille's heart hammered against her ribs. The bus stop was still 2 blocks away, 2 blocks that suddenly felt like miles. "You deaf or just stuck up?" The vendor selling tech bookie at the next stall glanced up, saw what was happening, and quickly looked away. The old woman arranging tangerines in pyramids suddenly became fascinated with her produce. Nobody helped fallen angels in this neighborhood. Lucille made it another 20 feet before a hand grabbed her arm, spinning her around with enough force that her tea splashed across her wrist. "I said, I'm talking to you." Jax. She'd seen him before, holding court at various corners of the market, a man in his early 30s who dressed like he was still 20, all denim vests and backwards baseball caps, tattoos crawling up his arms like they could make him more than he was. He ran protection rackets in this district. Everyone knew it. The vendors paid him to keep their stalls safe from the very violence he threatened. A snake selling antivenom to cure its own bite. "I asked where you're going," Jack said, his grip tightening. His breath smelled like soju and cigarettes, and up close, Lucille could see the bloodshot veins in his eyes. Whatever he'd been drinking all day. "Home." Her voice came out smaller than she intended. "I'm just going home." "Home?" Jack smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "Funny, I know everyone who lives in this neighborhood, and I don't remember seeing you at the community meetings." Behind him, his crew had materialized like smoke. 4 men total, including the muscular enforcer she recognized from the gym on 3rd Street, the one who wore sleeveless shirts in winter to display arms covered in amateur prison tattoos. They formed a loose semicircle around her, cutting off escape routes with practiced ease. "That's a nice dress," Jax continued, his eyes traveling down her body with undisguised assessment. "Real nice. That's not a dress someone wears to ride the bus home. That's a dress someone wears when they've got places to be, important places, expensive places." "It's just a dress," Lucille said quietly. "Please, I don't want any trouble." "Trouble?" Jax laughed, and his crew laughed with him on cue. "Who said anything about trouble? I'm just making conversation with a beautiful woman in my neighborhood. That's not trouble. That's being neighborly." But his hand was still on her arm, his fingers digging into the soft flesh above her elbow hard enough to leave bruises. "You know what I think?" Jax leaned closer, his voice dropping to something meant to sound intimate, but came out predatory. "I think you're not from around here. I think you're one of those girls slumming it in, playing poor for the thrill. Rich girl shit." "I'm not." "Let me finish." His grip tightened until Lucille gasped. "See, I've been doing this a long time, and I can always tell when someone's pretending to be less than they are. It's in the way you walk, the way you talk, the way you hold that paper cup like it's dirty." Lucille's eyes darted around the market, searching for help that wouldn't come. The vendors had all found reasons to turn their backs.
The few customers in sight walked faster, heads down, pretending not to see. And then her bees landed on him. 3 feet away, at a battered wooden table outside a pojang matcha serving fried chicken and beer, sat a man who seemed to exist in a different dimension than everyone else. He wore a black suit that probably cost more than Jack's made in a month, tailored so precisely it could have been painted on. His hair was styled back with the kind of exactness that suggested either military background or obsessive control. A porcelain teacup sat on the table in front of him, steam rising in delicate spirals against the harsh neon backdrop. And he was completely, utterly still. Not the stillness of someone trying to avoid notice, the stillness of someone who didn't need to move because the world would rearrange itself around him. He was drinking tea at a pojang matcha, a working-class drinking tent, in a suit that cost thousands of dollars. The contradiction should have been absurd. Instead, it felt threatening, because while everyone else in the market was watching Lucille, the vendors sneaking glances, the passers-by turning to stare, Jax's crew leering openly, this man hadn't looked up once. Not when she'd walked past his table, not when Jax grabbed her, not even now as Jax's voice grew louder and more aggressive. He simply raised his teacup to his lips and took another sip, his expression one of total, crushing boredom. "You listening to me?" Jax shook Lucille's arm, snapping her attention back to him. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I'm listening." "Good, because here's what's going to happen. You're going to tell me who you really are, and then we're going to figure out what you're worth to me." One of Jax's crew, the one in the basketball jersey, moved closer to the man's table, trying to get a better angle to block Lucille's view of the street. In his carelessness, he bumped the back of the man's chair. The chair rocked slightly. Tea sloshed in the cup, and still the man didn't move, didn't turn around, didn't even tense. He simply waited for the liquid to settle, then brought the cup back to his lips as though nothing had happened. The crew member glanced at him, seemed to register the expensive suit, and quickly looked away, like he'd accidentally touched something that might burn him. "I'm nobody," Lucille said, her voice breaking. "I swear, I'm nobody. I work at an accounting office on—" "Bullshit." Jax's face was inches from hers now. "You know what I think? I think you're that beauty queen, the one from the scandal. What was her name?" He snapped his fingers at his enforcer. "What was that girl's name? The one who got caught with the gangster?" Lucille's blood turned to ice. "Lucille something," the enforcer supplied. "Lucille Meiners. Yeah, I remember. She was all over the news for like a month. Then she disappeared." Jax's eyes widened with recognition and something worse, opportunity. "Holy shit, it is you!" His smile spread slowly like poison in water. "You're her, the fallen angel. Man, you were all anyone could talk about. Beauty queen caught with a mafia boss? Daddy died of shame, lost everything." He whistled low. "That must have hurt." Lucille felt tears burning behind her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. Not here, not in front of him. "That makes things interesting," Jax continued, his voice taking on a calculating edge. "Because see, if you're hiding in my neighborhood, that means you don't have anywhere else to go. And if you don't have anywhere else to go, that means you're vulnerable. And vulnerable people in my territory, they pay insurance. I don't have money. Everyone has something." Jax's free hand came up to trace the strap of her dress, his finger running along the fabric with nauseating slowness. "If not money, then something else. You were a beauty queen, right? I bet you know how to be real accommodating when you need to be." The enforcer laughed, a sound like gravel in a blender. Lucille tried to pull away, but Jax yanked her back hard enough that she stumbled. "Where you think you're going? We're just getting started." At the table 3 feet away, the man in the black suit set down his teacup. The sound was soft, almost delicate, but somehow in the chaos of the night market, it cut through everything like a knife through silk. Jax didn't notice, his crew didn't notice, but Lucille noticed, and she watched as the man's hand drifted to his collar, adjusting it with movements so slow they felt rehearsed. And that's when she saw it, the tattoo. Not the decorative kind that men got to look tough. This was different, intricate, traditional, black ink that crept up from beneath his collar like smoke, disappearing along his jawline in patterns that suggested dragons or phoenixes, or things that had meaning in worlds Lucille had only glimpsed in scandal sheet headlines. The kind of tattoo that marked someone as belonging to something bigger and darker than street gangs playing at power. 6 months ago, Lucille had stood on a stage in Seoul under lights so bright that they'd turned the world white. She'd worn a different dress then, ivory silk that cascaded down her body like water, with crystals sewn into the bodice that caught the light with every breath. The crown they'd placed on her head was heavy, real gold and Austrian crystals, the weight of it making her neck ache even as she smiled and smiled and smiled. Miss International Korea 2024, the announcer had shouted, and the audience erupted. Her father had been watching from a hospital bed 300 miles away, cancer eating him alive, but smiling through the morphine haze because his daughter had done it, had made it, had become something more than her circumstances. "You did it, sweetheart," he'd whispered when she called him from backstage, her hands shaking so badly that she could barely hold the phone. "You made it mean something."
The crown had meant endorsement deals, Samsung, LG, luxury skincare brands, numbers that made Lucille's head spin, enough money to pay for her father's treatments, to give him a chance, and all of it sponsored by a man named Park Haeun, a businessman, her father had said, a friend from his military days who'd made good and wanted to help the daughter of a fellow soldier. Lucille had met him exactly once, in a hotel lobby, not a room, in full view of cameras and people. He'd paid for her pageant training, her wardrobe, her nutritionist and personal trainer, tens of thousands of dollars. She'd thanked him for 5 minutes, he'd told her to make her father proud, and then he'd left. That was it. That was the entire relationship. But when the photographer caught them in the lobby, her in an evening gown from a fitting, him in a business suit, both of them simply walking toward the door, the story wrote itself. Beauty and the Beast, pageant queen's dark connection. The tabloids had dug into Park Haeun's past, and what they'd found, or claimed to find, was 20 years of alleged mafia activity, money laundering, protection rackets, 2 suspected murders that had never led to charges. The Ghost of Busan, they called him, and Lucille Meiners had taken money from him. Never mind that he was her father's friend, never mind that the money had gone to pageant expenses and medical bills, never mind that their meeting had been completely innocent. In the court of public opinion, she was guilty. The crown was revoked within 72 hours. Her father died 3 days after that, the stress triggering a cascade of complications that the cancer made fatal. And Lucille had disappeared into this neighborhood, into anonymity, into the cheapest apartment she could find where nobody watched beauty pageants or read tabloid magazines. For 3 months, she'd been safe, until tonight, when she'd worn the wrong dress and walked into the wrong gangster's line of sight. $5,000, Jax was saying now, his hand tangled in her hair, forcing her to look up at him. "That's what I think you're worth for starters. 5,000 by Friday. I don't have... Then you better find it." His grip tightened, pulling her hair hard enough that Lucille gasped in pain. "Please," the word came out broken. "Please, I'm telling you the truth. I don't have anything." Everyone has something. Jax's other hand grabbed her shoulder, and Lucille realized with horror what was about to happen.
He was going to make her kneel. Right here, in the middle of the market, in front of everyone, he was going to force her to her knees like some kind of medieval punishment. "Let's start with showing proper respect," Jack said, his voice taking on a ceremonial quality that made it worse. "Let's start with you bowing to the king of this neighborhood." He pushed down on her shoulder while pulling her hair, and Lucille felt her knees start to buckle. "No, please, no!" "I said bow." He yanked her hair hard enough that white stars exploded across her vision, pain radiating from her scalp in waves. And Lucille screamed. Not loud, not dramatic, but a broken, desperate sound that came from somewhere primal, somewhere that still remembered what it felt like to have dignity, to be human, to matter. At the table 3 feet away, the man in the black suit stood up. The movement was unhurried, casual, like he'd simply decided he was finished with his tea and it was time to go. But there was something in the way he moved, the predatory grace of it, the absolute economy of motion that made even Jax's enforcer take an involuntary step backward. The man brushed invisible dust from his suit jacket, adjusted his cuffs, and then his eyes, dark, cold, empty of anything resembling mercy, settled on Jax for the first time. The man spoke one word in Korean, his voice so low it felt like a vibration in the air rather than sound. "Gooey. Move." Jax's grip faltered just for a second, just long enough for confusion to flicker across his face before anger replaced it. "What did you say to me?" The man didn't repeat himself. He simply stood there, 3 feet away, his hands loose at his sides, waiting. "You got something to say?" Jax released Lucille, shoving her aside hard enough that she stumbled into one of his crew members. "You want to be a hero in my neighborhood?" The enforcer with the prison tattoos cracked his knuckles, stepping forward with the confidence of someone who'd won every fight through size alone. "Should I handle this, Jax?" But Jax held up a hand, his eyes narrowing as he studied the man in the black suit more carefully. The expensive tailoring, the perfect posture, the way he stood like he owned not just the ground beneath his feet, but the air around him. "Who are you?" Jax asked, some of the bravado leaking from his voice. The man's answer was to reach up and adjust his collar again, this time pulling it down just enough that the tattoo became fully visible, not just the edges that had peeked out before, but the full design. A dragon's head, rendered in traditional Irizumi style, its mouth open in a silent roar, flames curling from between its teeth. And below it, partially hidden by his collar, the edge of what looked like Chinese characters. Lucille had seen tattoos like that before, in the photographs that had destroyed her life, in the tabloid articles about organized crime that she'd been forced to read during her scandal. Traditional Yakuza or Korean Mafia markings, the kind that indicated rank, affiliation, and most importantly, kills. Jax saw it too. His face went through a rapid progression of emotions, confusion, recognition, and finally the pale wash of fear.
"Oh, shit," one of his crew members whispered.
"Jax, that's—"
"Shut up," Jax snapped, but his voice had lost its edge. His hand dropped from Lucille, his attention now fully on the man who stood between him and the exit. The man reached into his jacket, a movement so casual it took a moment for anyone to register the threat, and pulled out a silver cigarette case. But as his jacket fell open, Lucille saw something else, the glint of a ring on his right hand. Not just any ring, a thick band of platinum or white gold with a seal carved into it, the kind of ring that marked someone as a high-ranking member of a syndicate, the kind of ring that appeared in police reports and organized crime documentaries. "Listen," Jax said, his tone shifting from aggressive to conciliatory in seconds. "We don't want any trouble. This is just a local matter, neighborhood business. This girl, she's been—" "This girl," the man said quietly, speaking for only the second time, "is not your business." His Korean was flawless, but there was something in the accent, not foreign, but refined, educated,
like someone who'd learned to speak the language of the streets, but was born to speak the language of boardrooms. "We were just talking," Jax tried, his hands coming up in a placating gesture. "Just having a conversation, right, guys?" His crew nodded quickly, suddenly very interested in finding exits. But the man simply opened his cigarette case, removed a single cigarette, and placed it between his lips without lighting it. The gesture was absurdly casual given the tension crackling through the air. "You put your hands on her," the man said, the unlit cigarette bobbing slightly as he spoke. "You made her scream. That's not a conversation." "Look, if she's with you, man, I didn't know. I swear to God, I didn't know. She didn't say anything about having protection." The man's lips curved into something that might have been a smile if smiles could hold that much contempt. "She shouldn't need to." And then he moved. Lucille had watched enough action movies to think she understood what fast looked like. Choreographed fights where cameras slowed down movement, where every punch was telegraphed and visible. This wasn't that. The man closed the distance between himself and Jax's enforcer in less time than it took to blink. One moment he was standing by his table, the next his hand was wrapped around the enforcer's wrist, twisting it at an angle that made the larger man's face go white. The enforcer tried to throw a punch with his free hand. The man in the black suit simply stepped inside the arc of the swing, using the enforcer's own momentum to send him crashing into the Pojangmacha's support pole. The entire structure shuddered. The proprietor, a woman in her 60s who'd been pretending not to watch, scrambled backward with a yelp. And the man's teacup remained on the table, still steaming, not a drop spilled. "Back off." Jax pulled a knife from his waistband, the blade catching the neon light. "I will cut you, I don't care who you are." The man regarded the knife with the same bored expression he'd worn while drinking tea. Then he moved again. This time Lucille tracked it better, saw how he deflected Jax's knife hand with his forearm, the blade passing inches from his suit jacket. Saw how his other hand came up to strike Jax's throat, not hard enough to crush, just enough to make him gag and stumble backward, the knife clattering to the pavement. Two of Jax's other crew members rushed forward together, trying to overwhelm through numbers. The man dropped low, sweeping the legs out from under the first one, used the momentum to spin and drive his elbow into the second one's solar plexus. Both went down gasping. 5 seconds, maybe 6. 4 men neutralized with movements so precise they looked rehearsed. The man straightened his jacket, checked his cuffs, and walked calmly back to his table, picked up his teacup, took a sip. The enforcer was groaning on the ground, clutching his wrist. The 2 crew members were trying to catch their breath. Jax was on his knees, one hand at his throat, his eyes watering. And the man simply stood there drinking tea like he'd just swatted away a few mosquitoes. "You," he coughed, his voice coming out strangled. "You're dead. You hear me? You're fucking dead. I got connections. I got people." "You have nothing." The man's voice cut through Jax's threats like a blade through silk. He set down his teacup and finally, turned to face Jax fully. He reached into his jacket again and this time pulled out a slim leather wallet, flipped it open, held it so Jax could see. Lucille couldn't make out the details from her position, but she watched the color drain from Jax's face, watched his hands start to tremble. "No," Jax whispered. "No, that's not. You're not." "I am." The man tucked the wallet away. "And you just assaulted someone under my protection in my city. So here's what's going to happen. You and your friends are going to stand up, very carefully, and walk away. You're going to leave this neighborhood tonight and never come back. And if I ever hear that you've bothered this woman again, if you so much as look at her on the street, I will take that as a personal insult." "But this is our territory," one of the crew members protested weakly. "We've been running this district for—" "Not anymore." The man's voice didn't rise, but somehow it filled the entire market. "As of this moment, this district is under new management. Spread the word. Tell everyone you know. The Jagalchi night market is no longer your hunting ground." Jax struggled to his feet, his legs unsteady. The fight had gone out of him completely, replaced with something that looked like existential dread. He coughed, his voice coming out strangled. "You're them. You're fucking dead. You're the Ghost of Busan, Park Haeun." The name hit Lucille like a physical blow. Park Haeun. The man who'd sponsored her pageant training. The man whose connection to her destroyed her life. The man she'd met exactly once in a hotel lobby 6 months ago. He was here. He'd been here the entire time, sitting 3 feet away, watching while Jax terrorized her, waiting for what? For the right moment? For things to escalate enough to justify intervention? Lucille's mind spun, trying to make sense of it. Park Haeun, because it was him, she could see it now. The sharp features she'd glimpsed in that hotel lobby, aged slightly, harder, turned his attention to Jax's crew.
"Help your friend up, take your knife, and go." They didn't need to be told twice. The enforcer was hauled to his feet by his companions. Jax scooped up his blade with shaking hands, and then they were backing away, stumbling over their own feet in their haste to escape. The market, which had fallen silent during the confrontation, slowly came back to life. Vendors returned to their stalls. Customers resumed walking, though all of them gave Park Haeun's table a wide berth. Lucille stood frozen, her back pressed against a shuttered storefront, her mind unable to process what had just happened. Park Haeun turned to face her fully for the first time. Up close, he was exactly as she remembered, and completely different. The same precise features, the same controlled posture, but there was something in his eyes now. Not warmth, exactly, but recognition, acknowledgement. "Miss Meiners," he said quietly, "I apologize for not intervening sooner. I needed them to reveal their intentions clearly." His English was perfect, barely accented, the voice of someone comfortable moving between worlds. Lucille's voice came out shaky. You've been following me?" "Protecting you." He gestured to the chair across from him at the table. "Please, sit. You're in shock." "I'm not." But her legs were trembling, and she realized she might actually fall down if she didn't sit. She lowered herself into the chair carefully, like it might disappear beneath her. Park Haeun settled back into his own seat, once again the picture of casual elegance. He poured tea from a thermos into a second cup and slid it across the table to her. "Drink. It will help." Lucille's hands shook as she picked up the cup. The tea was jasmine, delicate and floral, completely at odds with the violence that had just occurred. "I don't understand," she said finally. "Why are you here? Why were you at that table? Why—" "Your father called me 3 days before he died." Park Haeun's voice was matter-of-fact, like he was discussing a business transaction. He was coherent for the first time in weeks. The doctors said it was a final rally before the end. He used that clarity to make me promise something. Lucille's hands stilled around the cup. "He asked me to watch over you, to keep you safe. He said the scandal had made you vulnerable, that people would see you as an easy target." Park Haeun's eyes met hers, and for the first time she saw something like emotion in them. Regret, maybe, or obligation. Regret, maybe, or obligation. I know, but he believed it was, and he was dying, so I made him a promise. Park Haeun took a sip of his tea. "I've been keeping that promise for 3 months, making sure you stayed safe in this neighborhood, making sure people like Jax understood there would be consequences if they bothered you. But Jax didn't know. He said he knew." Park Haeun's voice hardened. "Every gang leader in Busan knows my face. They know my name. Jax knew exactly who I was the moment he saw me at this table. He chose to ignore the warning because he thought I wouldn't intervene, that I'd let him take what he wanted as long as he didn't escalate too far. Why would he think that? Because that's how power works in this world. Territory is respected. Boundaries are maintained. I don't usually involve myself in street-level disputes. His lips curved to that cold smile again. "But I saved my life once, a long time ago. We were soldiers together. He took a bullet meant for me during our service. And in my world, a debt like that is absolute. It transcends territory, boundaries, politics, everything." Lucille stared at him, trying to reconcile the man in front of her with the monster from the tabloid headlines, the Ghost of Busan, the alleged killer, the crime boss. But all she could see was someone who'd kept a deathbed promise to a dying soldier. "What happens now?" she asked quietly. Park Haeun set down his cup and leaned back in his chair, studying her with an intensity that made her want to look away. "That depends on what you want. I can continue to protect you from the shadows. You can keep living your quiet life, working your office job, hiding in this neighborhood. I'll make sure no one bothers you again. Or you accept the reality of your situation." His voice was gentle but firm. "You're not invisible, Miss Meiners. You're a disgraced beauty queen living in a rough neighborhood with no real protection. Jax won't be the last person who sees you as a target, and I can't be everywhere all the time." "What are you suggesting?" "I'm suggesting you stop hiding, Miss Meiners." His eyes held hers. "Stop pretending you can go back to being normal. Your name is already connected to mine in the public consciousness. The damage is done, so use it. Come work for me. Let the world see you standing beside me, not as a victim or a scandal, but as someone under my protection by choice." Lucille's mind reeled. "Work for you? Doing what?" "I run several legitimate businesses, import-export, real estate, investment firms. I need someone with your education, your polish, your ability to present the right image, someone who can move in high society and command rooms." He paused. "Someone who understands what it's like to perform under pressure." "You mean you need a beautiful face to distract from the ugly business?" "I mean I need someone intelligent enough to understand the game and strong enough to play it." His expression didn't change. "You used a pageant pin to disable one of Jax's men during the fight. Don't think I didn't notice. You're not as helpless as you pretend to be." Lucille blinked in surprise. She'd barely registered doing it. Pure instinct when one of the crew had gotten too close. The decorative pin she still wore from her pageant days, sharp enough to draw blood, driven into the man's hand when he'd grabbed her shoulder. That was reflex. That was survival instinct, and it's exactly what I need. Park Haeun finished his tea and stood, smoothing his jacket. "Think about it. You have my number. Your father gave it to you 6 months ago, though you never used it." He was right. The number was still in her phone, saved under PH emergency only. She'd been too afraid to delete it, too afraid to call it. "And if I say no?" Lucille asked, standing as well on unsteady legs. "Then I keep protecting you from the shadows, and you keep living half a life." He pulled out his wallet and left several bills on the table, far more than the tea cost. "But I think you're tired of hiding, Miss Meiners. I think you've been hiding since the scandal, maybe longer. Since the first time someone told you to smile for the cameras, and I think part of you wants to stop smiling and start deciding what you're worth."
He turned to leave, then paused. "Your father told me you were the strongest person he knew, that you'd survived things that would have broken most people. I didn't understand what he meant until tonight." Park Haeun glanced back at her. "You screamed when Jax grabbed your hair, but you didn't beg. You didn't offer him money you don't have. You didn't promise him things you weren't willing to give. You just screamed. That takes more courage than you realize." And then he was walking away, disappearing into the night market crowd like he'd never been there at all. Lucille stood alone at the table, her cold tea forgotten, her mind spinning. She could go back to her apartment, back to her accounting job and her anonymity, back to being safe and small and invisible, or she could make a choice that terrified her. She pulled out her phone with shaking hands, found the number saved under PH emergency only, stared at it for a long moment. Then she typed out a message before she could change her mind. "When do I start?" The response came within seconds. "Tomorrow. I'll send a car at 9 a.m. Wear something that makes you look like a queen, not a victim."
Lucille looked down at her red dress, stained now with tea and fear and the debris of the market. Then she looked up at the night sky visible between the buildings, stars barely visible through the city lights. She'd worn a crown once and lost it. Maybe it was time to claim a different kind of throne. One where she didn't have to smile unless she wanted to. One where being seen wasn't the same as being vulnerable. One where the girl who'd learned to survive pageants could learn to survive something darker, something real. Lucille Meiners walked out of the Jagalchi night market with her head high, her spine straight, her red dress catching the neon lights one last time. Behind her, vendors whispered about what they'd witnessed, about the Ghost of Busan and the Beauty Queen, about violence that moved like poetry and protection that looked like fate. And ahead of her, somewhere in the shadows of the city, Park Haeun was already planning how to turn a fallen angel into a queen of the underworld.